Okay, welcome. My name is Frances MacDonald. I'm from Agriland Media, and I'd like to start by introducing our panel this afternoon. We'll do it in alphabetical order. We have the Fianna Fáil TD, Barry Cowan. We have Claire Curran, who is the Sinn Féin TD and also the spokesperson for Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs for her party. We have Michael Fitzmaurice, Independent TD, and then we have the Fine Gael MEPs, Colin Markey, and we have Maria Walsh. You're very welcome to our panel. And of course, the man who needs no introduction is Eddie Punch, the General Secretary. So this year, it's all going to be about elections, whether it's European elections, local elections, or indeed perhaps a general election. But as you will have seen across Europe, we've had farmer protests this week. They've swept the board in France, Germany, Italy, and today we've seen very extensive farmer protests in Brussels. So my question, first of all, to the MEPs is Europe listening to farmers, and specifically Irish farmers? And we'll start with you, Colin Markey.
Well, I think certainly, I can appreciate where the farmers are coming from. I was just looking at it today in terms of all the serious legislation that went through the Parliament in the last 2 or 3 years, whether it be a nature restoration law, whether it be industrial emissions directive, pesticides, everything went to the Environment Committee, and it didn't go. It only had an opinion in the Agriculture Committee. So the reality is, if farmers having the farmer voice is second place to the environment voice, and no wonder farmers are frustrated with that across Europe. It's interesting. I was talking to some people from Germany yesterday, and they said to me that everybody in Germany is actually behind the farmers, because they see it that across the board the level of regulation, the layer upon layer of regulation, is impacting every sector. So I think farmers can actually get a lot of support across Europe for this. I don't think, in fairness, when I see it being on the Agriculture Committee, when we raise concerns about things, it's not listened to enough. There's 48 members in the Agriculture Committee and there's 88 members on the Environment Committee. So we need agriculture to have a stronger voice, and I think that's the frustration is with farmers. That's something that I've echoed myself in terms of at Parliament level. The reality is it isn't working as it is at the minute. I think certainly we have to look at a new way in which we engage in the political system as a farming community. We have to make a stand, certainly, but we have to get away from a situation where we're on the back end of an environmental agenda. Food security is a priority. Ensuring Mercosur doesn't undermine European standards is a priority as well. So I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of putting the agricultural agenda back at the top. And I think post-Ukraine, food security was a priority for 6 months, and we did a lot of work in terms of the Agriculture Committee in terms of making sure that that was top of the agenda. But it has, like other things, have moved on now, and I think we have to make sure that everyone recognises that CAP was established for food security, and that comes first. We have to protect the environment, but we have to protect in a sensible way, a stakeholder, farmer-led way. And I think that's, if we want real meaningful change, it's going to come for the people on the ground and the farmers. And if we don't put them at the heart of it, we'll still have more protests and more problems. And I think that's my concern. The change needs to be led by the farmers. They have the practical experience, and that's the frustration there is across Europe.
Okay, thank you. Michael, we've heard you say that you don't think that Europe is listening to Irish farmers, though.
I'm sure so. First of all, on the line of the protest, fair play to the French and the Germans, they know how to protest. When you're doing a protest, you gotta bring something to its knees or just forget about it, because this, you'll see in places half-arsed protest. It's not working. You've got to make sure, and Macron is coming out, even the only thing, if you read what he did say, he's on about Mercosur not being ratified, but if you do read the rest of the paper, the headline is one thing, but if you read the rest of it, he wants farmers in the other countries that would be sending in products that they have to farm the same way. Is Europe listening? Absolutely not. Why is farmers sick of it? First of all, from day to day now, you don't know what you can have in nitrates, you don't know what you can have in cattle, because it's changing the whole time. And there's report after report coming out. There is legislation after legislation. We've seen in the last term, we've seen the NRL, and I've made it very clear. Colin says that the stuff going through, there is stuff going through, but the problem is the MEPs are voting for it. I don't know what amount to say they have in it, well 15 MEPs or 14 out of 710 or 20. But Ursula von der Leyen has an agenda, and I'm on the Ag Committee, and we were out there, in fairness, we met some of the MEPs, and we were out there, Jackie Cahill and myself and Tim Lombard and Paul Daly, And we met the guy that's over the derogation, the environment fella, and like first thing I asked him, where was he from? And he told me he was from a city. Well, like, if you're dealing with environmental farmers, you don't know a lot about stuff if you're living within the middle of the city. Second of all, when it came to talking about the different problems, and when we went discussing even CAP, like the guy said straight out to us, and I think farmers needs to know this, that the next CAP, they want to go more environmental. Well, is that listening to farmers? No, it's not. Farmers got CAP to subsidise the price of food, that people in every town and city around Europe could afford food. And whether we like to dress it up one way or the other, the likes of the Nature Restoration Law, the likes of the Science Directive, the likes of the Habitats Directive, with some of the TDs here, we were involved this morning down the road there, that there's people ready to be flooded out of their house because there's an SAC down the road there. But the SAC comes before human life under Europe's laws. Now, if that's the Europe we're living in, it's not a great system, in my opinion.
Let's just bring in Maria. Is that fair now, what Deputy Fitzmaurice is saying?
Parts are, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Parts of what Deputy Fitzmaurice is saying, I agree with. Other parts I don't. I think the benefit of us being in the European Union for the last 50 years has, do I think CAP is fit for purpose, and the speed of which, picking up from my colleague Colin Markey here, the speed of which legislation is coming out is at a speed that is not suitable for anybody, and that I concur with. But when you look at the farmer safety supports, when you look at the fact that even in the last days, in terms of the change of the Commission holding back on certain changes, I mean, your initial question was, do we agree with, or what's our thoughts on the protests? I absolutely do concur. I think protests are really, really healthy. I think they're important. I think you get to, when people work together, organisations work together, you get a better sense of negotiating at the table. Do I believe, because right now in Brussels, from my team shared with me about 1,700 tractors, certainly welcome that. Do I agree when protests moved into a more physical sense, so we know that there's a number of fires and a number of damages to buildings? No, because that actually gets us nowhere, and nowhere closer to putting more money in your pockets and allowing you to do, or encouraging you to do, and putting what you love to do, put food on the table. But this sweeping statement of the European Union is not fit for purpose, I don't like that, because we hear that up north and we hear that across in a third country now, the United Kingdom. So we have to be very, very careful in terms of how, as representatives, I believe, how we talk about the European Union. There's absolutely changes. The Common Agriculture CAP is not fit for purpose. The speed at which legislation is coming out is too fast. But there's a number of things of the low-hanging fruit that we can get right. In terms of supplying more supports for watercourses, different changes at a national level for VAT for farmers, so they're not paying as much, succession support, making sure that if you're in Cork and you're putting an injunction in an environmental piece against something locally, well, that shouldn't happen, and that's where we can change. So this sweeping statement I don't agree with, but some stuff I do.
So let's just talk about, you want to be an MEP. Why is that?
Well, I could give you a whole lot of political reasons, but I won't.
Tell us the real reason then.
Well, the real reason, if you want to talk about that issue specifically rather than the question that was asked initially, Laois Offaly is now in amongst its Midland neighbours, its Leinster neighbours. We in Fianna Fáil have not had a seat there for 15 years. I want to rectify that. I think I'm well placed geographically to take advantage of that. Good name recognition. I'm committed.
We're talking
I'm
about
committed
farmers
to it.
here. We're talking about farmers, not politics.
Yeah, well, you asked the question, I give you the answer. In relation to farming, I mean, the move towards sustainability is happening in food and farming and agriculture. It's happening in energy. There's an issue in relation to corporate tax and the defending our tax regime in Europe in relation to the OECD. It not moving at the same pace as the EU in relation to the provision that have been made there. So that's the reason I'm running, okay? They're the issues I would like to tackle. The question then, do I understand the reasons for the protests across Europe? Yes, I do, and I can acknowledge the need for them. I can acknowledge the point that they're making. At the crossroads we're at from a farming perspective, and have been at in the last number of years, there are three pillars that are essential for progress to be made in relation to income, in relation to that being farm families and the potential that they have to improve their income in this, as we move towards the transition and sustainability. The social implications specifically relate to the rural economy, relate to the place of farming in the economy, the revenue generation it provides for the state to deal with many other issues. And thirdly then is the environmental pillar. And as it stands, there's movement maybe driven by Europe, predominantly relating to the environmental pillar, but not at pace. The issue with farm income is not at pace. The issue of the social implications is not at pace, and that has to be addressed. And yes, you know, the CAP programme is not fit for purpose in the context of the amount of change that is required, and people will only move in that direction when there's proper and due reward. So it's up to the state and Europe to invest in that reward.
Okay.
You get the reward, you get the move towards sustainability. We can maintain our place as having the best products available in the world as regards all the markets that are available to us.
Okay, let me bring in Claire. Claire, one of the things that farmers have been saying this week across Europe is that there's too much direction coming from Brussels, that they're not getting the opportunity to farm the way they want to farm. And we hear that in Agriland whenever we're talking to farmers every day. Is that something that you're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the reality is that Europe set the agenda now when it comes to farming. Whatever kind of farming you're in Ireland, the vast majority of the rules, the regulations, the laws are coming from Europe. And as Michael said, like we have a very small number of MEPs out of over 700. So I mean, we are a small pool out there, and that is why I believe we need a strong government hand in hand with our MEPs out in Europe to make sure that the message and the farming that we do, which is unique in Ireland as grass-based, that message is put out in Europe, because a lot of the rules and regulations that are coming from there, they're blanket, they're for everyone, and there's no consideration for the type of farming and the farming that's actually done really well and sustainably in Ireland that isn't the same in every other country. But I think there is a growing frustration for farmers in Ireland when so much is coming from Europe. A lot of it comes quickly, it's rushed, it's debated, there's 100 votes on one thing, and things are coming and coming and coming at us so fast. And then we have a department here that I think we have a huge job of work to do to try and fix and build a better relationship between farmers on the ground and the department, because an awful lot of the time they are too rigid, and the farmer who is doing their best are really suffering on the ground. And there is an awful lot more coming now from Europe, a lot of complex stuff is coming from Europe, and farmers on the ground need to be supported by the department, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of farmers are doing their best. They've always done their best. They're dealing with the rules as they come because they've no choice, otherwise they don't get their payments, and it's as straight as that. But there is a job of work for us to do here nationally, given and bearing in mind that an awful lot is coming from Europe, and that is why the European elections coming up in June are so important as well. But it can't just be 14 MEPs out of 700 in Europe. It has to be a strong voice here nationally at government level as well, and both of that is absolutely necessary to ensure that the farmer's voice here is heard. But I think there is a job of work with the department that needs to be done as well.
Okay. Eddie, you've had the AGM and the annual conference today. What are your members telling you?
We hear a lot of frustration with what's going on for farmers as a result of the legislation after legislation that's coming from Europe. People feel that they're not being listened to. There's no question about that. And I know from our own perspective in ICSA, we have this sense that since COVID, the Brussels bubble has become more and more detached from the people on the ground. The reality as we see it is that the Commission has taken onto itself more political power and influence than it was meant to have under the way in which the three institutions are set up. This was shown, I think, by Ursula von der Leyen making a unilateral decision to speak for Europe on the bombing by Israel of Gaza without properly waiting her turn to find out what the member states felt. And that's indicative of a bigger problem we have here, that the Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen, has decided without really proper deep listening, shallow consultation, yes, but deep listening, no, that the Green Deal is where they're going. And that has then transformed into forgetting that Europe has a proud food producing heritage, And when you listen to French farmers, or Italian farmers, or German farmers, the same as our own farmers, they're proud of their traditions in producing quality food for the European people. But that's all been dismissed now. You hear, like, appalling stuff has come through where the Commission has put forward proposals to support plant-based production systems. We have, for example, at the moment, a battle over the nitrates directive. And look, we're all in favour of quality water, everybody. But there's a sense now that Ireland's grass-based production system is under attack. And, you know, the ironic thing is we've just succeeded in getting a PGI, a grass-fed PGI. And I said this to Commissioner Sinkevicius when he was in Dublin recently. You can't just give us, on the one hand, a PGI for a grass-fed farming system, and on the other hand, show essentially a disdain for that grass-based system and say, we're going to tighten and tighten and tighten the noose until grass-based farming is no longer viable. So I think, you know, from our perspective in ICSA, we think there's a real need for the Commission to be rolled back in terms of the extent to which they are bringing legislation after legislation that is, in our view, and it's the view of the people I talk to, biased in favour of an environmental extreme agenda, biased in favour of big business, but not really paying attention to ordinary small businesses on the ground. And we can talk that about in terms of small abattoirs or small farms. In all of the things that we see coming from the Brussels bubble now, it's hostile to the ordinary people. And I think this is a key issue for this election, that the people, that all of the people here and everybody else, there's 10 seats in rural Ireland, that we have to look at electing 10 people who are unambiguously in favour of the Irish national interest, fighting for that in Europe, and who personally are deeply committed to Irish food production and the systems of farming we have.
Yeah. Maria, do you think that's fair because you're part of the machine of Brussels? You know, you're inside there.
No, I do think it's fair. I mean, there's 705 MEPs, 27 member states. Just to correct some of the stuff, we'll move from 13 MEPs to 14. Unfortunately, 25% of that current 13 MEPs sit in a very, very small political group. We sit, both Colm and I and the Fine Gael delegation sit within the EPP, commonly known as the Farmers' Party. Take in mind, Ursula is a family member of that. But I do take Eddie's points that, and I think it's all been shared here, the goalposts keep changing, and the system in which that communication at a time where there's so much information out there is not coming down. And I do take that, and I absolutely concur that we need to be sending people come June 7th that understand the farm system in all its forms. Understandably, here is one or two types of farm systems, but there's many others. You know, I come from the west coast of Ireland, small part-time farm. My dad would only love to be a full-time farmer, but unfortunately the financial rewards are simply not there. Has always worked off farm. So my lived experience of farming is very different to perhaps some in this room who would be out and would have family members in that. But the issue is, I think on our part, is a fairness to all type of farmer, a fairness to the speed of which legislation, guidelines, practices are coming. But we also have to understand that we have a competitive market and we are the best in class when it comes to food, and nobody's deterring from that. And I think as all has been shared, nobody's deterring the fact that we all have our hand in better water quality and other environmental pillars. But I can't argue with any of that, because if that's what the membership is saying, then that, as a representative and as a West of Ireland representative, I have to take note of and fight for.
I just want to ask Colm, obviously Eddie there mentioned derogation, a huge disappointment in the country last year over the derogation, and I know that you personally were talking to the Commissioner, but there wasn't a movement there. You know, we were kind of led to believe perhaps there'll be a respite, but at the end of the day the decision was there. For you personally, you know, you're there, you were making the case for Ireland, you didn't succeed.
The reality is that I pushed hard to try and get an extension in terms of derogation. I spoke directly to the Commissioner, I had various people in the room with me. He made commitments at that stage in the room. And those witnesses there to it, I came out on the basis that I felt I needed to say that, because if I didn't say it, it'd never be out there. So I need to come out and say what was said in that room, so it was on the record, so it could be challenged. Because if I didn't say it, it was like it never happened. So I pushed hard to try and achieve that. Admittedly, we didn't get what we wanted out of it. But I think there's a bigger debate here. There's an assumption that we have a derogation because in some way we're doing something wrong. The reality is we've a derogation because we've a grass-based system that grows more grass and needs more nitrates to grow that grass. And that it's not that Ireland is doing something wrong. Admittedly, we have to improve our water quality, and that's another debate. What's in the derogation or what's in the nitrates directive? I think that the other measures that's more broadly like fencing off water courses, managing roadways, grey water coming off yards, when you spread your slurry, those sort of things make the difference. The practical measures that farmers are prepared to do, they'll make the difference, and I think that's important. Just returning to what you were saying earlier about the frustration with farmers, I was on the barricades last night. I spent 2 hours outside the European Parliament. I only came home this morning till 2 o'clock in the morning. I was with the lads outside the European Parliament. I talked at length with many of them, and to be fair to them, everyone said, what group are you in? It's I'm in the EPP. And they recognised across the board that we were the group, as Maria said earlier, we were the group that was representing the farmers and working with the farmers. When it came to pesticides, when it came to industrial emissions directive, when it came to the soils directive, when it came to the NRL, like I voted against NRL in the committee, but I'll be straight with it. I know we had a meeting in Ballinasloe earlier in the year. There was a lot achieved in the negotiations that I felt was worth banking, rather than just rejecting it and come back again with something else. But I fully accept that people aren't necessarily happy with that.
Yeah, but I was going to say, Michael, you've raised the concerns that you have on nature restoration law. You've been up and down to various...
We all have concerns.
Look, I just today I put out a few bits, or I went through a few bits. If the nature restoration law, and we've learned even more since that meeting in Ballinasloe, if MEPs vote for that in the next few weeks, in relation, you have like Articles 1A, 3394, that we've got legal advice on. And if you want to see it any time, the consequences for farming in Donegal down to Kerry in the marginal land, or in the what we would call the peaty soil, is in real trouble. And that's not me saying it. I remember going around in 2009 and 2008 when we were lucky, we were the bogmen that people were looking at and said, actually it's only affecting them with the Habitats Directive. We see Lough Finchner down the road now affected. We see airports affected. We see ports affected. We see roads affected. And when we highlighted this earlier, that's scandalous what them guys are saying. Have a look at the moment, the control that Europe has on us. Have a look at your forestry, if you want to plant forestry. Peaty soil, it was Europe that made this decision, not our ministers, in fairness. 30 centimetres or more, where one time ago in Mayo and all them counties there was plenty of forestry sown. I cut timber in Glenhesh above on the side of a mountain, and you couldn't even sow a tree in it today now because the EU won't allow it because of the type of variations in it. Have a look at Skip, and everyone here knows the debacle that's going on in the ICBF with stars. And I talked to a department person, a person that would have a bit of common sense, and he says, Fitz, how would that be solved? And I said, well, I'll tell you, the farmers that's in it at the moment, you have to get them through that goalpost for the next 5 years. And in my opinion, whether Mammy the cow was a 5-star and she came down to 3, the next generation of heifers offer, if you do it, you'll get the farmers through. And he said, you're fairly right in what you're saying. But he says, we'll have to go to Europe to get clearance for that. Like, this is the facts. When it comes to CAP, our CAP budgets right across Europe was cut, isn't that correct? In the overall package, and there's less to go out. When you look at the NRL, have a look at the Science Directive that no one is talking about at the moment. In the last week, we done a thing with the rapporteur in Brussels, and look at, in fairness, they were sound, and we need to put in submissions, and I'd urge all farmer organisations, farmers, and us as politicians to put in stuff, because the raft of stuff that's coming at us, and like it seems to be, and I'm not going to blame MEPs in total for everything. there's a raft of stuff, no more than above where we are, that the permanent government, which is the civil servants, and the same in Brussels, are writing up legislation. It was them that wrote up the NRL. Ursula von der Leyen has an agenda to leave a legacy of a Green Deal. She doesn't know the consequences. Like people are on about, you spoke earlier about sustainability. It's about survival. Forget about sustainability. Because in a lot of areas, if the stuff that's coming at us comes through, and I hope I'm proved wrong, but I don't think I will, unfortunately.
Let me just bring Claire in, because Claire has spoken about this before, and the balance that there, you see the challenges that there are when we hear Europe and the government talking about sustainability and the challenges for farmers. We heard Charlie McConnell, the Minister for Food and the Minister, say that we had 10 billion from CAP this year, that was going to support family farms. Do you think that is working in reality?
Well, look, CAP was initially established for food production, and that's what it was meant to be all about. And we have seen moves where it is being made more and more conditional on farmers to do X, Y, and Z when it comes to the environment, which they're happy to do, but they need to be compensated financially for it. And I think that move away from what CAP was set up to do initially is problematic. I think when we're looking, whether it's the NRL or whatever else, we need to see new pillars of funding from Europe coming into the pockets of Irish farmers. And we've seen it, the latest example in acres. So farmers signed up to acres, 46,000 of them, way above what was expected. They did their bit. And the ones in cooperation zones were told in December, sorry, you're not going to get your payment till February. I asked the Minister last night at committee, can we get a date for February so farmers know when they're going to be paid for the work they've already done at cost? And he doesn't have a date because the department are under pressure. So where this will really unravel is where farmers sign up to schemes, do what they're asked at a cost, and then the government let their side down because they don't get paid. So I think CAP needs to be protected and sustained for what it was. The CAP we have for this term, we're told, was more than the last. But in fact, when you look at the rise of costs, and particularly the rise of input costs for farmers, CAP is actually less in real terms in relation to costs for farmers, which have gone through the roof. So CAP needs to be maintained for what it was meant to be. And anything additional above that, particularly moves for the environment, we need to see additional funding from Europe for those schemes. Farmers will take the schemes. Acres is a prime example of that. They'll do the work, but they need to be rewarded for that. And that has to be followed through from government so farmers get their money in their pocket. Otherwise, acres isn't going to be a success, and we all want it to be a success, but we have to keep both sides of the bargain has to be met, particularly for farmers who need this additional income. And if the income farmers were getting, and they were getting a fair price for their produce in the first instance, which still they are not, then CAP maybe wouldn't be as relied on as it actually is, but it is because we're not getting the fair price.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to you in 1 minute, Colin, but you're on the outside looking in now to be an MEP. What's your thoughts on Green Deal?
Well, look, to recap on some of what has been said here, and to be fair to Claire, I agree with what she said wholeheartedly. I mightn't agree with Sinn Féin's tax policy, but I can agree with what you've said in relation to this issue. And you're quite correct that food production systems have to be aligned with environmental ambition and consumer sentiment. Like I said earlier, you have to move the demands in the environmental element have to be met with reward on the income side. And absolutely correct that the commitment that was made in relation to acres by farm families hasn't been matched by the department in relation to the late payment. And that's a terrible start and a terrible vista to be at. And it just has to be corrected and it has to be put right. And, you go back to the nitrates directive. And yes, we had a directive. We had that because we needed that, because others don't have a 9-month season. Others don't have, they've less energy costs, they've less labour costs. So it was an incentive that was required. And the impression was that it would only impact on the dairy sector. But obviously they've responded in such a way that now price of land has meant everybody else is impacted by it. So it needs a new incentive, a new initiative to improve water quality for everybody. But it has to be done in a way in which recognises there's different soil types in different regions, there's different issues in relation to topography and soil type, and there has to be packaged bespoke measures to help and assist with those soil types, with those regions, so as they can respond and play their part, not just in the dairy sector, but in every other sector of agriculture too, because we all want to win in relation to water quality. And if we can prove and help and assist and ensure that that happens, we can retain it at the rate that we're at presently, rather than moving towards a 170, which might be detrimental for everybody concerned.
Yeah.
But the point I made earlier, and the point that Claire has made, is the one that should resonate. Yes, we can move if we align everything together, but we act and everybody lives up to the commitments they're making. And if the state or Europe doesn't live up to that expectation or that commitment, you won't see the rewards. You won't see the rewards going into the pockets of the farm families, and you won't see the rewards in relation to the ambition that's being sought from an environmental perspective being realised either.
Okay, Colin, I know you wanted to come back in there.
Yeah, I was just picking up on some of what Michael was saying, and I agree with him on a lot of things. Look, at European level, one problem we have is about making all this legislation workable. The reality is, what I said already, so much of it goes to the Environment Committee for decision rather than the practical people from on the ground within agriculture. Their opinion comes second. And I think we have to make sure that the agricultural voice is front and central of agricultural policy, not a sideshow to the environmental, hardline environmental fundamentalism that comes out in a lot of cases from that committee, because it's not necessarily practical science-based environmental proposals. The second thing I'd say, Michael was saying about we have to go to Brussels for changes in SCEP. We have to go to Brussels for changes in nitrates. The reality is, those plans were proposals that were put to Brussels by Ireland. So I fully accept that we have to make the system workable in Brussels. But we also have to be careful what we put forward to Brussels in proposals, because every time you come forward and you say, like, SCEP should have been done differently, or the nitrates could have been done differently, come back and getting it changed is a lot harder. And I've had this out with the Commission. When you go to 27, let's say, commissioners around the table, and you want to get a change at that level, and you have to get agreement across all, which was the situation with the nitrates. It's a lot harder to get a change when you get the plan wrong in the first place. And I think that's one thing that we have to look at in terms of SCEP, in terms of the nitrates, that sometimes, yes, you do have to go back to Brussels, but if you got it right in the proposal you put in the first place, you mightn't have to go back to Brussels. That said, as I say, our job at European level is to make sure the legislation is practical, and that my point is, if you put the farming voice in the middle of it, there's no one more practical out there in terms of the environment than the farmers. Okay. And that's where we need to lead us.
Bring Eddie in on SCEP. Now, we heard from the Minister that there was going to be some flexibility built in there. Did that give you any confidence?
I think we have to actually go back to the start of the problem here, which is that ICBF is trying to do too much. There's too many metrics being put into the mix. So instead of just breeding the export weanling, which is what most suckler farmers are about, they're trying to solve climate change, they're trying to solve factory specs, they're trying to solve a whole array of things, and they're putting all of this into a kind of a mix, TB, which is actually a computer with algorithms, I guess.
Yeah.
And feeding in massive quantities of data, and out comes results. And the results are clearly detached from what suckler farmers want. Part of this is because we're trying to have a green tone to our suckler scheme, which frankly is nonsense. Part of it is because we are trying to apply dairy farming metrics to suckler farming, which is also nonsense. And like, to give you an example, if you're a full-time dairy farmer, it might be absolutely vital to you that all the cows calve in a 6-week period. If you're a suckler farmer who's got an off-farm job, it's irrelevant. And when you talk about the extent to which calving difficulty is focused on in the SCEP and in the ICBF measures, again, if you've got 15 suckler cows, the difference between a 10% and a 7% calving difficulty mightn't actually be any difference at all in your 15 cows calving. But it could be a big difference in the quality of the weanings you supply afterwards. So this speaks to the fact that we have the green agenda everywhere now. And it's not in touch with the reality of the citizens on the ground. I constantly hear that the citizens are demanding more sustainable food until they go into the shop and pay for it. And the CAP was originally set up to provide cheap food and lots of it. That is essentially what the Treaty of Rome said about the CAP. We now have a scenario where the CAP is meant to solve all of these new objectives that it was never set up to do. And we need to say enough is enough. If you want climate solved, biodiversity solved, name your agenda, find a budget for it. But we don't have that going on. And that's a real big problem, I think, for farmers here. And you know, there's also, and Colm spoke about the way in which the Environment Committee gets first dibs on this. This is a real big problem, and it's a dark art. And nobody quite understands. I don't understand it, and I'm looking at this a long time. You see, once upon a time, if a legislative proposal came from the Commission, and it was about agriculture in any way, shape or form, it automatically went to ComAgri, the Agriculture Committee, and they essentially were the committee that sliced and diced this and worked out what would work on farms. Then it became, well, we have primary competence and secondary competence, and it became, well, the Environment Committee is entitled to look at it as well. And in the last few years, it's changed, that now the Environment Committee, which frankly is full of MEPs from urban parts of Europe who really have no clue what they're talking about. And I have to say it that way, like there are people who have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to farming. And we get this as well. I was in a seminar last week, the Westminster Policy Forum, and I was lectured about I wasn't fit to talk about agriculture because I was just a paid lobbyist, whereas the environmental representatives were some sort of, you know, holier than thou people who could speak about how it was these people should transition their farms.
Yeah.
And it was, in a nutshell, wave a magic wand, forget about your cows, grow blueberries.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we change that, Michael?
How do we what?
How do we change that problem?
I think that there will be a change.
And let's just, like, you know.
I think there will be a change for the simple reason, I think the MEPs around Europe, I'm not saying Ireland, but the MEPs around Europe will be a totally different setup the next time. I think people have woken up that this stuff, this mad stuff that we're on at the moment right around Europe in the line that we don't need, we nearly believe now that we can cut the land in half that we have, that we can produce more food, and that we really don't need meat. And have a look at the advisory that came out. I was shocked the other night. The advisors to the Commission came out the other night and they said we need to put a carbon tax on dairy and on beef to stop people eating it. That's some statement to come out from advisors. And that was printed in the media. And I think that people right around Europe, you look at the farmers' protests, you look at what's going on, people are sick of, you know, being talked down to the whole time. And I believe the next time, I believe we'll have a different Europe, because I don't think Van der Leyen will be back. She might be with your group, but Marie, but I think that we'll have a totally different Europe in the next election. And I think, and I hope, and if we don't, Jesus, I wouldn't, you know, it's not a good picture at the moment, because the mad stuff that's going on is that people nearly believe that they can live on fresh air and that they don't need to eat at all. But what they don't realise, and they'll find out fairly soon, is that you need a farmer 3 times every day. When you get up in the morning, you need to eat a bit. In the middle of the day, you need to eat a bit in the evening. And the problem that we have done, if you watch Europe's policy, if you watch it in steel, if you watch it in certain industries, they have offloaded it to someone else, China and someone else. So that this mentality at the moment of carbon, of how many tons we're putting up and what we're sucking down and what we're putting away, that someone else can do it. And we'll tick the box that we're the good boys. And you look at the likes of Brazil, where they'll hammer down forestry, but we'll still do a trade deal with them. You look at Canada at the moment. There's actually farmers in Holland looking at buying land now in Canada, because Canada has openly said that they believe that they can produce more food because Europe will need it. Yeah. Now, unless we come to our senses in Europe, we're in real trouble. And I believe the next election will shake a lot of that in Europe.
Claire, I know you've spoken before about the generational drain from farming. Do you think a different Europe will get more younger people to stay in farming?
No, I think we'll need an awful lot more than that for young people to stay in farming. Look, immigration is back again. Lots of young people are leaving once again, mainly because they can't afford to live in this country. But when it comes to farming and sustaining our family farms, I know lots of farmers who, take my own dad for example, he's in his early 60s, my two brothers farm, but he would almost feel now like he can't nearly encourage them onto the land anymore because there isn't an income there, and a lot of them do have to do another job off the farm. So I mean, unless you have a farm where you can make money, where you can work hard, which you do work hard because it's a 24/7 job in an awful lot of cases, but if you're not getting remunerated for that, then it cannot be sustained. And I know a lot of farmers now are slow to encourage the next generation onto the farm in some cases because they don't feel the livelihood is there for them. And that's a big problem, and that's something that we have to turn around, and I certainly don't think it'll be turned around depending on whoever comes out on top in the next European elections at European level. So we need to do that work here. I think MACRA do an awful lot of really good work, particularly in relation to generational renewal and bringing the young farmers up, and they're an excellent organisation. But unless we get the fair price for the produce in the first instance, then the income is not there, and we're not going to see the younger farmers come on board. Take the forgotten farmers, another example. Young farmers still waiting for their payment that has been promised now for years. We were told we'd see the proposals of it last November. We're still waiting. So when they're being left behind, more frustrated, and a lot of them feel like they can't keep going, they can't wait any longer, then a young person looking in will be saying, I'd be mad to go into that. So we have to get the income right, and unless we can have a sustainable income for our younger farmers coming up and support them in coming onto the farm, then I think we're going to be in a very negative space, and I think an awful lot of farmers are going to be under more and more pressure. Farmers are getting older, and where young people are immigrating, that's more pressure again. But the key to this is income, and that is how you sustain the family farm. And if we do not get the fair income at the first instance, let your CAP then and other schemes complement and add to that income, great. But we have to get that right in the first instance. The agri-food regulator's now been set up. I hope that will do something. But again, they're not going to be able to look at competition. They're not going to be able to look at how the price is set. That was the whole point. That was the whole protest outside the marts or the factories, the beef protest. That's what it was about. And the agri-food regulator isn't going to be able to look at that. And again, that's a problem. So we have an awful lot of work to do. But if we don't get the income right, we're not going to get the young farmers coming up. And the forgotten farmers need to be paid their money that they've waited for now for years as well.
Yeah. Barry, you're former Ag Minister. Do you think there's been a lot of missteps along the way? Do you think that we haven't had the right strategy in place in order to encourage younger people to go in and to ring fence the family farm for the future?
I did a lot in my time in agriculture, all of 17 days, whatever it was. Anyhow, look, it's all about finding markets, it's all about competition, it's all about assisting farm families to embrace initiatives that can yield results and return. I think, like I said earlier, the crossroads we're at now, CAP has, as Eddie has said, has served its purpose. It's doing its job insofar as it can. But all these new initiatives, new practices need new funding, need new incentives. And that's essential. And if you take an example where the effort is being sought or talked or prepared to bring dairy and beef closer together, you have to, in an effort to first of all retain heifer production to continue the dairy produce, and then move towards a combination that produces a dairy beef product thereafter and has an environmental impact in relation to animal husbandry, but also only if it can be combined with, linkages to your breeders, linkages to your finishers, linkages to your co-ops, to your factories, with a view to that product enhancing or improving the product we have presently, and market and competition will determine that. But if those incentives and those initiatives and those new practices are to be explored, there's a cost initially before it gets to a profitability stage, and that has to be funding over and above what's provided for in CAP. That has to be funding that over and above what's provided for by our own state, by our own government, because we want to maintain and increase the profitability, the participation, and the role the farming sector plays in Irish life. And if that's to be done in a way in which improves income into the future, and if that's the road we have to travel, well, that has to be front-loaded. And there has to be new incentives, there has to be new monies, whether that involves even equalising the cap payment or the single farm payment presently, so be it. But it's up to state and Europe to invest appropriately for this economy, for the potential that we have. And we can get help from Europe to do that, but it doesn't have to be an all of Europe programme. I think we can find a bespoke package to suit our needs.
Okay, let's talk about one issue that has been discussed in Europe and which is very prevalent and important for Ireland. It's live exports. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, me or?
Yeah, no.
It actually was debated at length. Both. I don't sit on the Agri Committee. Colin's our representative from a Fine Gael standpoint, but even in the Employment Committee, in terms of how it impacts the hauliers that are moving, we're going to see a decline, estimated to see a decline in the next 10 years of hauliers coming into the market, which makes it more and more difficult as an island nation to get stuff off. That's something incredibly important to look at, not just with farmers well, we have to do that in tow. And sadly, some of our colleagues from right across the House, Irish included, didn't understand that an animal has to come off the island in order for us to for anybody to make money, and actually we needed them off for various reasons depending on the farm enterprise. For my side, as long as an animal is a good enough age to travel and is doing it in a decent standard, which is happening in a majority, not in a small sense, then I can see that continuing on, and unless it has come up in the Agri Committee of late, maybe Colin can feed into that. But from our side, in the last vote on that, then it was a pretty strong sentiment. You did have, no doubt you're following, if you're not, I'm about to tell, from a Green initiative that they felt animal health equality were not above board, and it was really fought. It was really quite tight. Coming at a plenary level, but we right that wrong.
Let me just ask Eddie, is that a concern for your members?
Absolutely, it's a concern, and it actually applies. It's of equal importance to the dairy and to the suckler sector. And right now, they're pretty, good prices for the Italian weaning. If we took that away, that would be the biggest damage we could do to the suckler herd. The dairy herd has also a huge dependence on moving, calves out to veal units in the Netherlands. And again, people who don't understand say, well, why don't we have a veal system in Ireland? The calving pattern makes it impossible. So that's just an example of, we can't have these discussions with people who don't know what they're talking about. And live exports, have been the subject of attack from an orchestrated campaign of people, and we met them, and we've met them over the years. They're not interested really in animal welfare. They're against livestock farming, full stop. They're the same people who have the adverts up on the side of the road, goveganworld.ie.
Yeah.
And what really kind of disturbs me is the battle we have in agriculture against the money that is against us. We start with legislation coming from the Commission, where there are thousands of Europe's smartest lawyers working inside in the Commission, who are being influenced by any amount of lobbyists out there, and they're putting rafts of legislation out at a speed that organisations like ours don't have the resources to combat effectively, because it's coming bang, bang, bang. Parallel to that is a lot of money. I mean, if you look at the Go Vegan World advertising campaign, how's that being funded? It's not being funded by members, I can tell you, because they don't have many. And if you look at, the amount of resources that are available to the environmental movement, for example, with college academics who have more or less a free hand to use their time running campaigns against animal agriculture, that's what we're up against. And I think one of the things I'd like to see is the European Parliament helping to slow down legislation. There's too much of it coming too quickly, and it's bang, bang, bang. And if you look at the last couple of years post-COVID, we had the IED, the Industrial Emissions Directive, which thankfully has been watered down. fair play on that one, because that was, going to put livestock farms out of business. We have the soils regulation, we had the nature restoration, and then we have a whole raft of stuff under biodiversity strategy and under climate targets.
Yeah.
And again, we could talk all day about climate. We're not saying that climate change isn't an issue. We're saying that somehow we have ended up as if agriculture is the cause of climate change, and it isn't.
I was going to ask Michael about this because, do you think farmers are still getting the blame, that they're getting blamed for climate issues, welfare issues when it comes to livestock? Do you see that there is a negative pattern sometimes emerging?
Yeah, I think there's a few things I want to say. And while we're looking at problems in farming, I was just thinking to myself when the others were speaking, we drive into Dublin most of us every day, and I wouldn't give an hour for the life you have to live in a city compared with us. This morning nearly I was sucking a few calves for the young buck, and I'll tell you one thing, it's heaven compared with being stuck within a city. As bad as things are, we need to make sure that our young people know that it's not the worst life in the world. We need to correct a lot of things, but we also need to give the message out to young people, in fairness, in the line of, say, starting up as a young farmer with the young farmer grants, and that there's a fair bit there. What we need to do at the other end is that the old fella that's 90 needs to let go of the place a bit quicker and give them some reward to release a bit of land, because that's awful important, that you'll get youngsters in at farming. But in the live exports, there was always a saying out the country, if you don't have a good live trade, you won't have a good dead trade. And there's my understanding, and look at Maria and Colin will know more about this than me, my understanding that there's some sort of reports there at the moment, but that it won't be dealt with by the end of this term by June, and that it's going to be in the next term that it's going to be dealt with. But I think that a calf, if we're exporting calves, they need to be strong enough. In my opinion, they need to be 4 weeks old. There's no point. You can't send out a calf a week or 2 weeks old. They're not strong enough, being honest about it. Yes, that might mean a bit more space on a lorry that you need, but we need to make sure that we don't give the other side the chance to be kicking the daylights out of us. In fairness to the most, you'll always get someone that won't do something right, no matter in what walk of life. But in fairness, there's drinkers on the lorries. If you look at the space they'd have, and I remember many a time going to England on a boat, and you'd have less space than what the calf gets at the moment. But that doesn't matter. Michael O'Leary, if you were travelling with them, you'd have less space than what a calf gets to travel to where they're going if you're on a plane. But there are things that we need to make sure is done right. But there's even air conditioning. Like the report that went out, what's sickening about this is that there seems to be a certain section of media that's obsessed with kicking the daylights out of farmers. Yes. Because if you look at if you look even at the thing that came out in the dairy, like a lot of stuff was so factually, it was completely wrong. When you look at the place that was out in Poland, they were finishing cattle, but they said it was veal. When you look at the lorry that dropped off a calf and the calf was dead, it was a calf from another country, it wasn't an Irish calf, but they still had to show it. And they showed a calf walking in by it as if it was one of us going into a mortuary shaking hands like that. The calf looked at the other calf and was sorry. But this is the type of propaganda that's actually doing a lot of harm, and it's not acceptable. Mm-hmm. And farmers, the big problem at the moment is that farmers are getting such a bashing. Farmers were always farmed. They're not scientists, and they're not people that get involved in the political game. They are good at what they do. And then they get slated and slated. And if you keep kicking someone often enough, you would tend to put down your head and you say, Jesus, what's going on here? And if that keeps happening, you will deflate the whole agricultural sector. We need to come out strong. And one thing I would always say about farming organisations, I believe that we need to fight the science with science, because an awful lot of the stuff that's out there
is lopsided with PhD students that done this, peer-reviewed and not challenged. And I believe we have to fight this back, because unless we do, they will keep kicking us and saying, oh, well, this says this and this says that.
Let me just ask Colin, do you sense that there is mood music in Europe that doesn't want to see live exports?
I think just picking up on Eddie's point, I think live exports is in a lot of ways a stalking horse for an agenda that is against livestock production. Like there's an industry out there of hyper processed foods, vegan burgers and all that, that actually there's a business model that's against meat production and against a vegan burger. It's a highly processed, value-added product for an industry out there that isn't agriculture. And then also the same goes for the climate targets. The reality is in relation to this whole animal transport issue over the last couple of years, there's been two elements to it. There was a specialised committee established at the start of last term. I came in the middle of that, when that was well advanced, and it was, if you like, the environmental lobby, or the animal welfare lobby, had it wrapped up in terms of where it was going. They were going to basically shut down the chance of livestock being exported out of this country because of the length of the sea journey and a number of things like that. They had it wrapped up. We turned that round. Number one, we said, in I think it was 2019, 275,000 calves were exported out of Ireland. 163 out of 275,000 died. That's 0.03%. Less than dies on a European farm on a daily basis. We pointed that out, which was critical. We pointed out a lot of other things that was critical to it. One of the proposals they wanted was to put calves into holding centres. And we said, hang on a second, with practical experience as a farmer, I said, look, if you take all the calves of the country, put them into one place, you'll spread all the disease of the country across all the calves. And you talk about antimicrobial resistance and less antibiotics usage. Well, that won't work. So we managed to turn all that round. And that vote, and it's just typical of people say, where's the votes and where's the future of the Parliament going to be? That vote was torpedoed by the EPP in particular. We had 8 votes, and we pretty much took them all bar one, and that one person isn't even in the group anymore, to oppose that. Other groups had like 4 votes, the Renew had 4 votes, 2 went each way, which would be typical of where the Parliament is at. You'll find the EPP and to the right of the EPP are in the farmers' corner. Renew, in fairness, pretty much divides 50-50, and sometimes they're with that group and sometimes the other. When you go beyond that to the left, where we'd say Sinn Féin and the Independents are, they generally oppose all the arguments.
Just back to the livestock exports. So do you think the position now is more neutral?
There's a second thing that has come out since that, which is a Food Safety Authority report, and that has a number of recommendations. It allows it doesn't. The 19-hour sea journey isn't counted in terms of the transport time, which is a massive win for us, a massive win. It now means that we're no different to anyone else in Europe, and we got that into it. 9 hours plus 1 hour plus 9 hours is what you can transport. That is the same as, it's actually slightly better than what it was previously. There's a couple of things in it still that we need to look at. They want to ban triple-decker lorries. If we ban triple-decker lorries for moving calves, it won't be economically possible to move those calves. There's no basis to, it's just a sentiment thing again. There's no basis why you should ban triple-decker lorries. There's a number of other issues in it. As Michael said, they want 5 weeks. And I think that's legit. Well, I'm not saying 5 weeks, but certainly 10 days is probably too short. And I think we're going to have to accept that to keep the public opinion on our sides, we have to maybe look at keeping the calves on the farm for longer. The third thing they want is to put feeding systems on the lorries. Now they're talking about, just to put this, because people are asking me, are they going to be able to export their calves next year? The reality is this is not going to go through in this term. And if it comes through in the next term, it'll probably be a year or two before it actually gets agreed. And at that stage, what's proposed is a 2-year transition for a number of the measures, like the 5-week calves and all that, but a 5-year transition for the like of a feeding systems in the lorry. So the first thing is not happening anytime soon. The second thing, from my perspective, is that triple-decker lorries have to be allowed to make it economically possible, and the feeding systems on the lorries, they're like, look, if you're stopping after 9 hours, you can feed the calves after 9 hours. And if you're stopping at the end, like on an Irish, this is the thing, like this will just give you an idea of how it works. There was an expert came in and said, the calf typically drinks its mother every 3 hours. So then this is the standard that you affect. And animals get thirsty after 9 and hungry after 12. The reality is, on an Irish farm on a daily basis, they're fed 8 hours in the middle of the day is probably the gap, and about 16 hours at night. And that's just every day. So why should them travelling in a lorry be any different? The fact is, we turned the specialised committee around, we basically torpedoed that by putting some practical suggestions forward. When it comes to the FSA report, there's a lot more sensible stuff in it, but there's 2 or 3 things in it that we need to deal with. And the other point of it is we can work on the time side of it, that it's not coming in anytime soon. Okay. So I think there's a lot of really good work that's done, and it was done by our group and a couple of an alliance around
I just want to pick up one thing that Eddie was saying about ICBF being the answer to all the prayers and issues. Claire, on TB, we have a strategy, eradication strategy, that doesn't seem to be working in the country.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned TB, and Michael will know this. We had the Minister in the Agricultural Committee yesterday evening going through the revised estimates, so basically the money allocated for this year. And both of us actually raised the fact and asked the Minister why there is a reduced budget in 2024 compared to 23 for TB eradication, which really would open your eyes, because we know that TB has actually in fact been rising and in some cases stagnating, but it hasn't been going down. And like, this is a programme that's been around for a really, really long time, and it's not being eradicated. And now if the funding for this year is less than it was last year, and we're seeing TB going in the wrong direction, then that raises alarm bells for sure. So I think the funding has to be there in the first instance, but I think we actually need to look at the testing regime that's there and see, can it be reviewed and revised for farmers on the ground. Like, we have our TB test once a year at home. It takes a day and a half to gather all the cattle and be ready. It's a huge job of work for a farmer, particularly those that might be farming on their own, might get a hand here and there. So I think the programme is important, it's there. The funding has to match the demand and the level of the disease that is there if we are actually ever going to eradicate it. But when you see the funding for this year down, I think it was down, was it 30, 40, 50%, Michael?
It's down to 71 million, down to 57.
Yeah. So, I mean...
What's your reaction to that, Eddie?
That's of concern.
If you see funding going down?
It doesn't make any sense. And we had a deer forum which ICSA participated in and has finally faced up to the fact that this is part of the issue. Yeah. But that needs, there's a plan there, but it needs funding, and we don't have the funding element of it after a lot of work done by the forum. So that's critical. You know, the TB forum is one of the busiest committees we're involved in.
What is happening?
Sorry?
What is happening there? Because
there's
feed of information.
Yeah, there's subcommittees. There's an implementation group. There's a finance group. There's a communications group.
How is it helping farmers that are locked down?
We've had to fight against the department agenda pretty resolutely for the last 3 years, because the department agenda was to limit, restrict and devalue certain herds because of their TB history. Now, that's a serious attack on somebody's, hard built up livestock herd. And if you want to, it's a fundamental principle from our point of view that we have to be all in this together. So if you devalue someone's herd by a measure, you can't do that unless you have a funding regime in place to cover that cost. And we spent a lot of time fighting against it, and we've beat it back, but it keeps coming back up again. And this is a huge, again, it's a Dublin version of the Brussels problem I outlined earlier, which is detachment from the practitioners on the ground. And I think, TB is kind of one of the most wicked problems in Irish agriculture. And, I think someday somebody is going to say, what problem are we trying to solve here? But that's not for today.
Can I just come in on that there? In fairness to your organisation, when I have a problem with TB, and I must compliment you fairly, always is at the end of a phone to help us. But I think the question as well we have to ask, can we get rid of TB? This has gone on years and years, since I was knee-high, and I'm a bit grey now, and it's gone on about TB. And a guy, and he's actually down there, Hugh, that he's retired, and he was a veterinary inspector, and he studies it, and he goes through it, and I had many a chat with him. And a gene can be in an animal, especially on the dairy side of it, and when they come under pressure, no more than a person if their immune system goes down a bit, and it can come out in them when they're under pressure. And the question is, and I think we need to talk about this, that unless, in my opinion, that there's some vaccination, which, I don't know, everyone will say that it's not, they're trying something in England at the moment, but
The facts are, and I think the debate has to be had, can we get rid of it? Or how low we can bring it? Yes, you're right, Eddie. Deers, big problem. Worse, right round the country now, there's roads being blocked with deers. And we have the badgers, right? The two usual suspects. But on top of that, if you listen to these people, and I'm no expert on it, but if you listen to these people that have studied it, if you had a damp type of a building, there are certain cattle that it can bring it out in. You can also have cattle that come under stress. So the question is, can we get rid of it? How low can we get it? And what's the other alternatives? And I think that debate will soon have to be had in the whole thing about the TB.
Okay, thanks. We're just going to ask if there's any questions there from the floor. I see a few hands up, and we have a couple of mics. So if you just want to wait, and we'll just Nasta's going to grab you the mic there so that we can hear you, and our panelists will be happy to chat to you. So first gentleman here just at the front has his hand up, if that's okay.
I'd just like to ask the panel, two things. The first thing is when is it all going to stop the farmer bashing? Farmers can't take much more. The regulation that we have coming down the road there every day, we have to spend more time doing these things and we've less time to farm. By nature, farmers, they're hands-on type of people. They tend to their crops, they tend to their flocks, they tend to their animals. But we've been denied that time now to do that because there's so much stuff to do with legislation and paperwork and training courses and doing things for the acre scheme. And we can't cope with it all. We've just too much to cope with. It's getting on top of us. It's causing stress on families, causing stress on farmers. The workload is just getting too heavy and too hard. So when is it all going to stop? That'll be my first question. And the second one is to do with young farmers coming on. I have a couple of young sons. I have one son left there in November, went to New Zealand with 7 other young lads. And he's a lucky man, for he gets going out at the weekends now, so he does. If he had been at home, he wouldn't be. He'd be working. But every weekend he goes out, he meets Irish lads out there. And there's not a weekend that he hasn't met Irish lads. He's out there from November, and he has met in the region of over 30 other Irish lads, and he's only within an hour of where he's set up his base out there. So all those Irish lads are out there, and there is no incentive for them to come home. Why should they come home? As I say, if they're home, he'd be working his backside off every weekend with me, and isn't he far better away enjoying himself than working? So what is going to be put in place to make those farmers come back to, potential farmers come back to farm in Ireland? I have lucky enough to have 2 farms. Of one farm, they're 3 miles apart. And when I go down that road every morning and every evening, there are 10 farms on that one stretch of road. Most of them are nearly back to back, touching each other. There's nobody on those 10 farms coming on in the next generation.
Okay, we'll start with Barry and we'll move along here. What's your response to that?
Well, the whole issue with farmer bashing and the negative aspect of discourse in relation to the sector and the industry is something that most public representatives acknowledge and appreciate, but they've become more vocal and more supportive of the industry in their dealings with government, in their dealings with the EU or whomever they're charged with the responsibility to deal with. And, you know, as I said earlier, you know, if there's 3 pillars, the 3 pillars must move together. You can't expect the sector to move on the environmental issues and not be matched by the commitments from the state or from those who are making funds available to help and assist and reward them for doing so. I think if people see that and correct like in recent months, as we said earlier, you know, an acres scheme, an acres buy-in, acres delivery, but yet the department is slow in getting the bloody money back to them. And that doesn't augur well for the sector, the industry, or those participating. And that has to be rectified. And the department and those in authority can't be expected in the future to expect progress in that area without working with and ensuring that there's adequate reward, that there's ample payments made on time and on schedule. And then you can see the return. But you see the progress that's been made in relation to spreading. You know, the progress that's been made in relation to the reduction in chemical fertiliser. The research pointed to the prospects in relation to clover, in relation to swords, in relation to new ways of doing business with less costs. And there's a return is being made in that area.
Okay, well,
and similar programmes have to be in such a way that the research is done, the capability of the department to roll it out is in place, and that the farmers can then row in and be paid accordingly and see improvement accordingly. If where there's improvements and there's a progress being made, well, then that in itself is an incentive to move forward with the proposals that are coming down the track.
Not to take away, but just kind of pick up on your second question, because I think both feed into to the overall in terms of succession planning or handing over to next generations. I mean, I went to the States for a number of years and then came back. So when I speak to young farmers that are heading off, when I speak to folks living in New Zealand and Australia and Canada, getting the experience and then returning home, I think that is, while we want to see the immediacy of them not having to leave, I do think it's a positive opportunity when they start coming home and you start seeing different farm enterprises slightly being tweaked here from a traditional status quo because of their experience of working on a different type of farm. Actually, I was just talking to John Keane, former Muckra president, who's currently studying in Nuffield and a big dairy farmer and had spent some time in New Zealand and had said it was phenomenal to see such a large scale farm and ultimately how to get that low hanging fruit at home. So that's one thing. The other is around making sure all the steps and all the stakeholders are fixing this. When is it going to stop? It's going to stop when I do think, while I don't agree with all the sentiments of Deputy Fitzmaurice, I do think in the next coming elections we are going to see a more balanced, I hope not more right wing, but I would hope a more balanced Parliament, so a slowdown. I would be nervous, and I know Eddie might feel differently about Ursula von der Leyen. I'd be nervous that the Commission is headed up by any other political party bar the EPP, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And because that doesn't feed into your first question, I think it becomes a ripple effect, and then we don't have anybody moving, and then you have a stalwart. That's the reason why you even have like the likes of Stormont as being the worst case example of nobody's meeting in the middle, and then nobody wins.
We'll just bring Claire into this.
Yeah, I'll be brief, I suppose, just in relation to the farmer bashing, and a lot of the time when that's talked about, it's talked about, you know, the general public, the media, different outlets that will point the finger at the farmer, particularly when it comes to climate. But again, it brings me back to one of my first points. There's a big role and responsibility on the department as well, because sometimes the bashing actually comes from the department too. And I've had several cases of farmers, genuine cases where money was owed or money had to be brought back, and there was genuine cases, and it is such a battle for those farmers. And there's lots of farmers that wouldn't seek help or assistance. You know, they do it themselves, they put the head down, and they can put themselves under huge pressure. So I think we have a huge job of work in mending and bettering the relationship between the department and the farmers themselves. And then on immigration, I finished college in 2016. I'd finished secondary school 2009, 2010. And lots of that generation of mine went abroad. They went all over the world, and that was after the 2008 crash. We're seeing similar happening again. And you know, some go for the fun and the experience and all that, that's great. But others go because they can't afford to live here, they don't see a future here, the cost of living is so high, they can't get a mortgage, they can't buy a house, they can't rent, etc., etc., etc. So we need more than just the farm and the income, which I've spoken about, to bring our young people back. They have to be able to build on their family land, for example. They have to be able to afford to live. So there's a whole myriad of things that have to be put right in order to bring our young people home, and we want them to come home because they're a huge loss to our communities and to lots of families around the country too. But we have to fix an awful lot of things in this country to bring them back and to actually make them feel, I can go home, I can build a life, I can afford to live, I can raise a family. And there's lots to do in that beyond farming, but farming as well.
Okay.
Yeah, look, one of the things about this is that there's a constant narrative like that farmers don't respect the environment, don't respect nature. The reality is, I for one, and I think everyone else around here, and Michael touched on it earlier, we are farmers because we love to get out in the morning and we love to go out into nature, on farms, and we actually respect that environment that we live in. The people who lecture us all about it get in the car on a Sunday afternoon, drive down the country and look out the window and think they're the ones that respect the environment. The people that live and act and work in the environment have to be respected more for what they do. Secondly, I think we have to get science back on the pitch. And we touched that earlier. The science actually is the farmer's friend, and we need to do a lot more about that. Thirdly, in terms of other sectors, everyone's talking about agriculture. If I take the aviation sector has 1/20th of 1% sustainable aviation fuel. That's what they use. 250th, I think it is. 1/20th of 1%. What is that? 2,000 basically of the amount of sustainable aviation fuel they use. So it just shows you how minuscule that is in terms of they're dealing with their fossil fuel problem. But no one talks of that because people want to go on their holidays. So I think we have to get the focus on other sectors and where they're at. And I think we have to recognise that the farmers actually genuinely are the people with the interest in the environment. They chose their living and their lifestyle because they love the environment. And everyone forgets that. Just in relation to the next generation, I think there's three things. The first thing is people need a viable future in the industry. No one wants to get into the industry if there's not a viable future. There needs to be a quality of life for those people, that the same quality of life. You as farmers, and you talked about your son, if he was at home, he'd be slogging and someone else down the road would be enjoying the good life. Farmers have to have the same quality of life as everybody else. And at the root of that is finance to be able to invest in their farms day one, to set up to a standard that it's labour efficient and quality of life efficient, that they can go off and do other things as well, whether it be part-time farmers or full-time farmers. So we need a viable industry, we need finance, and we need to give quality of life. And I think they are central to what we need to have the future.
Michael?
Yeah, to answer your first question, straight answer to you. The first thing is, I'd say when the Greens are gone out of government, it might be a help, some of the madness that's going on, because the media are in on it with them, in the line of the farmer bashing. In the line of youngsters, there's a myriad of reasons. I've looked at this myself. I see 12 youngsters from my own neck of the woods are gone to Australia, and them all had fairly good jobs. They wouldn't be prevented from building a house in our area, and there's a bit of a thing going on that a lot of them just want to go for a while. And some of them are going to the mines that they'll put a good shot of money together and work hard, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, and there's that part to it. There's also the part, and I know you'll be saying, I won't talk to that fella again with what I'm going to say to you. You said you had 2 farms. You're probably on the single farm payment for the 2 farms. And none of them have a herd number, and none of them have an income out of it. And the day is gone, whether we like it or not, a young buck at 20, 21, 22, 23, that you'll be saying, ringing them in the middle of the night and saying, come down, the cow's calving or the ewe's lambing, and they get nothing out of it. And that's been straight about it. Farmers needs to look at succession, but in doing that, the politicians needs to look, how do we help succession? Is there a fund that we can bring in that will encourage you to give one of those farms because you will get some sort of what would you call a retirement scheme or whatever? And if we don't do that, we are in serious trouble. Bear in mind, when we joined the EU, we had 300,000 farmers. We have 130,000 now. Probably 60% of them are part-time. And there's nothing wrong with being part-time, because a lot of farms, you'll have a blast of suckler cows. In fairness to any government, and I have to be fair in this, if I'm a young farmer and I have 50 or 60 or 80 acres, and if you look at the young farmer scheme, you'll get entitlements, you'll get the TAMs at a higher rate. There's a lot of stuff there compared with when we started off. I remember doing the Green Cert, the 250 hours, and then you had to do the top up, and you had to get a labour unit, and they were hoping Jesus of getting that. So you got no money starting.
But Michael, sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there.
Yeah.
There is no point giving any young fella a farm if it's not sustainable. Yes, they're getting the TAMS grants and all this and that and the other. They're investing,
Yeah.
but it's not increasing the return. And unless they get a return for the product, they're going absolutely no.
Yeah, I agree with
That is the problem.
I agree with getting a return for your product.
We've got a lot of hands in the room, so we'll try
in
and get
fairness,
to
in fairness, there is a lot of stuff there for young farmers compared with our day. And when you started, there's an awful lot.
Okay, okay, we'll get to you. Don't worry, we're not going to run out the room. We'll
Excuse me 1 second.
Okay.
The title is Dublin or Brussels Listening. Many years ago in secondary school, a Christian brother said to us, you can listen all you like, but if you don't pay attention, you're not hearing at all. One good thing out of all the conversation we've had here this evening is, that there's an election coming. And I think Mr. Fitzmaurice mentioned that there's going to be a whole change of the guard. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that the Greens could be blown into oblivion. My question is, and it's to a fellow county man, Barry, please don't take offence, but I think the government, the Irish government have sort of gone missing in action. They allowed the Green Party to sort of dictate the way forward for Irish agriculture in the last 4 years. It has been done on a sort of an emotional agenda without a scientific knowledge of whatsoever. I think there's now a deep realisation there that it's not working, and it's a sort of a scam to a certain extent. We all appreciate we can do better for the environment, and farmers have always taken up the mantle. And long before the environment ever became a hot topic, farmers have been looking after the land as if it was their pride and joy, which it was in many cases.
So what's your question?
My question is, why did the Irish government go missing and allow the Green Party to dictate to farmers something which they had no knowledge, no proof, no nothing of?
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, could I just add the same question?
Sure.
There was a lot of talk about the Green Deal in Europe, but there was a Green Deal in Ireland, and that has led to increased farmer bashing and bashing of agriculture. I suppose it's in relation to John's question there, like, hasn't the Green Deal in Ireland between Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party led to increased farmer bashing and bashing of agriculture here in Ireland?
Well, look, I think there's a realisation on the part of all parties, not just the Greens or Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or anybody else, the progress that's been made in relation to water quality and emissions. The Greens' role within government is something that was determined by the public, unfortunately. If you want to qualify that fact, they received 12 or 14 seats and were in a position to join with other parties to form a government. But the manner in which you achieve the ambition that's contained within the efforts to improve water quality, to reduce emissions, as I said earlier, to find production systems that meets with consumer sentiment and environmental ambition, which is not just confined to Ireland, whether we like it or not. We have to find ways and means in which to do it. And there is, as Eddie said earlier, CAP has served us reasonably well. Michael has said there's much more incentives and help and assistance available to the younger farmer and so forth to ensure that they're in a position to trade. Now you're back to the point, can you trade effectively and can you have adequate competition that will yield a return to bring them home from Australia, despite their intention in the first instance to gain some experience in other parts of the world. But to have something to come home for is important. Now, we have a huge, brilliant product in the farming sector, produced by all sectors within it, that is world-renowned and is supported throughout the world too. Not just on the basis of the quality of the product, which of course speaks for itself, but for the impact and the imprint that many people made in generations before us in those countries, and the way in which they allowed our reputation to grow internationally. But there is a duty of government to do so in a way which brings farmers with them, not to be seen to be in a position whereby it's us and them. And like I said earlier, if there's any critical analysis that I want to make of government, and I'm within government, a party that is in government, I've said it here 3 times already, the manner in which we move forward to achieve the ambition that everybody has across the country, it is in a way in which it is done in unison, in relation to income, in relation to the social dividend, in relation to the environmental dividend. And that's not happening. It's not happening blatantly so when you have an acres programme, an acres project, an acres buy-in, as I said earlier, whereby the farmer is making the commitment, but he's not getting the return with adequate payment on time.
Okay, we're just
And
going to bring
that's
in
putting you on the wrong footing straight away.
We're just going to bring in the gentleman in the maroon jumper there who's been waiting patiently.
What I want to talk to you about is, you're talking about young people on a farm. Farmers, one thing they're used to is working for nothing. Now, we produce a primary product. Now, if we go into set up a small business, let it be a yogurt business, a meat business, anything else, and you go to local enterprise or you go to the leader, we as farmers are excluded because we're primary producers. Now, forgive me for saying it, but a refugee could come into this country, set up a business and receive money from the likes of the local authority. Why is farmers who will work for nothing to get their business going, to set up a food product, to set up a small business that would subsidise their farm, maybe a young person set up, why are we as farmers excluded as primary producers?
Me again.
Well, first of all, I set up a contracting business, and you know the price of tractors and you know the price of balers. No one gave me anything. I had to decide for myself. At least for a young farmer this minute, if you have a bit of land or your father or mother gives you a bit of land, you'll get your entitlements. You'll get your A and C. If you have the green cert, you will. Yeah, but I am. I'm talking about the first thing you need is money, and I'm talking about.
Food business. Try and subsidise your farm.
Yeah, but in fairness, I think if you were doing a yogurt business, there is a person near me that, and I know this, and I'm not going to go say in what area, they were going to set up a yogurt business, they were milking and they were going to do that, and they would get help in setting up that business if from the local Leo office in Enterprise Ireland.
With Leo on a farm, with Leo or local enterprise, you go in and if you're producing a primary product, like beef, you cannot set up a small abattoir, you cannot set up a packaging.
Well, the first thing on a small abattoir to set it up, and you know this as good as I know, you have to go through all the licensing system, which is nearly undoable.
6 years ago, you're talking to a person that's done this. I have done what I've done, and what is cruel is the farmers are producing a primary product. You're forced then to go to sell it to the middleman. Why aren't we letting more people that are working on farms develop their product to an end product and take out the middleman? Get support from enterprise, get support from leader. But we're not getting it because you go into your local office, once you're receiving a subsidy, once you're receiving an EU payment, you're a primary producer. Primary producer excludes you then from getting grants in setting up any of these small businesses.
And if you had that, just a question for you to know, if you had that set up under a different entity, would you get grants?
No, you can't. You cannot
Right.
even be the owner. If you set up another company, you can't even be part. Leader and Leo, once you're a primary producer producing a primary product, you cannot develop that product forward to a shelf and receive funding from enterprise or leader. Now, someone in a town can turn around and buy steak off me, develop it into a burger, and he will get funding, but a farmer will not. Now, farmers, one thing they're good at is working hard, one thing they're good at is passion about the product, and number two is they will work for nothing to set up a business. But they do need a bit of funding. So
Yeah, yeah.
You're right, it's a fair,
It's a fair comment.
Fair point.
Alan, do you want
It
to?
should be recognised and should be considered.
Okay.
That's something we can bring back to our
Yeah.
Just look at-
organisations and parties.
I haven't got in the last couple of questions. I'm going to try and come across three things very quickly. I just wanted to agree 100% with Michael in terms of getting farmers established early. I benefited when I was 25 from an early retirement scheme that got my father, took retirement and let me get control of the farm. I went into the department one day when I was in Mockler president, and three of us went in, and every one of us had benefited from the retirement scheme. And the point was, we got in control of our farms so we could manage our farms in such a way that gave us the time to go to that meeting. At the same time, there was an installation aid scheme, and still is. We doubled the installation aid scheme when I was there in Mockler president at the time. So I'm a firm believer in giving people a chance to get in at the start. Secondly, this whole thing about the environmental and the tail wagging the dog on the environment. The reality is, there's a difference here. There's the environment, which we all believe in, and every farmer wants to do well by the environment. But there's something else. There's environmental populism. That's a whole different thing. It's a populism of what sounds like the environment. That's endemic in all parties, because there's a greenwashing of a green party that actually is others are running after chasing the green vote. And that's the reality. The environment and environmental populism are two different things. And Barry talked about consumer sentiment. Consumer sentiment is opinion, yet again, it's a populism. Science is what we need to back. The environment, we can protect the environment if we're given the chance to do it in the right way. All the environmental populism has delivered nothing for the environment for 40 years. All the environmentalists and the NGOs, it hasn't worked. Because what looks good by the environment, it's the practical people on the ground, like the farmers, understand the environment. Okay. And just let me say this, and being led by things like environmental populism and consumer sentiment is not being led by the reality of economics and protecting the environment.
Okay, we just want to try and get as many questions in to be fair to people that want to ask them. So we'll speed up the answers here and get as many questions back to the panel, because I know you have to wrap up in about 15 minutes.
It's just to link in with what that man said previously as well. With small abattoirs, why isn't the government providing export health certs? Why is it only department abattoirs that are getting them? Why are we cut off from exporting?
First of all, I don't know. Is the straight answer. I'm not going to go waffling something to you. What I saw when the so-called Chinese crowd came in, they brought them to 3 or 4 of the bigger crowds, and they gave the smaller ones to something like European export license. Am I right in that? And do you not get the chance to go for that?
No, we've been told by the FSAI, so it's blocking off small abattoirs.
Yeah, well, I think, look at, I'm not briefed in this.